think we'll go ahead and get started now that I've documented all this for social media. Thank you. This is very rewarding to see such a full room on a 4:30 on Friday afternoon. So we promise to solve all the questions and problems of libraries and university publishers as a thank you. This session with university presses and academic libraries actually picks up on a thread begun at last year's Charleston Plenary on the past, present, and future of university presses. So today we have a group of librarians and publishers who will engage in a discussion designed to delve into the inner workings of our operations and to facilitate a fruitful discussion of some of the challenges and the pain points that both presses and libraries each face in their day-to-day work. We'll touch on topics both of process and philosophy as part of the discussion. The larger question that looms behind many of the things we'll talk about today is, in this age of electronic content and access, how do libraries and publishers continue to successfully serve their academic communities? And what do the finances of that service model look like? Today, each of our panelists will open with a brief opening statement, one thing I wish everyone knew about publishers or libraries, and then a discussion will follow, and we'll make sure to leave a lot of time for questions. That was one thing last year that we really ran out of time for, so we want to get a lively discussion going both among the panelists and also with the audience here today. I've got the speaker biographies up on screen, so we'll do that instead of reading them at length and save a little time so we can dive right into things. The order of speakers today will begin with Ellen Faran, director at the MIT Press. She'll be followed by Fred Heath, vice provost and director of the University of Texas Libraries at UT Austin. Peter Berkery is the executive director of the Association of American University Presses, and Angela Carreño is head of collection development for the Division of Libraries at NYU. So we'll start with Ellen.
So one thing that I wish everyone understood about publishers is that identifying a standard cost for publishing a monograph is really difficult. What does it cost to publish a monograph is a question gathering some steam in the academic community. Various initiatives are exploring new ways of supporting monographs. Can we increase subsidies for university presses on a title-by-title basis in conjunction with open access publishing? In other words, can we move to author-paid books? Presses are eager for this conversation, but the answer to what does it cost is not simple. Here are 3 quick reasons why it's not simple. 1, our workflow is constantly evolving. Today's technologies and today's mixture of in-house work versus outside vendor work does not necessarily predict our costs even 2 years from now. 2, we don't publish standalone titles, we publish lists. Our publishing expenses support each monograph, but in the context of our entire list in its field. Many expenses benefit multiple titles, both new and backlist. As you know, presses invest in their disciplines of focus, nurturing the meaning that their imprint has to authors, to librarians, and to readers, helping to shape scholarly inquiry in the grouping of works in those fields. Our monographs are connected building blocks of scholarship. 3, our overhead expenses reflect all of the changing publishing activities of the press. Each monograph needs to contribute to general expenses, but by what method of allocation? Monographs may comprise the entire program for a small press, or sit alongside trade, text, or regional books, journals, and/or digital products for larger presses. Our overhead expenses reflect the commitments that we have made to channels of dissemination, its broadest possible audience. As we incorporate more subsidized open access titles into our programs, we will need to do some new thinking about overhead allocation. Allocating publishing cost is especially hard during periods of transition, as we know from the ongoing shift from print to digital. It will certainly be the case as presses make the anticipated shift in financial support, away from marketplace revenues toward a more subsidized environment. To be as clear as possible in conclusion, I am thrilled to be asked, what does it cost to publish a monograph? Especially by someone considering giving me money. The only point I'm making here is that answering that question necessarily reflects all of the activities that my press does to support scholarly communication, and that is a moving target.
I wish that everyone knew that publishers and librarians are business partners who know each other's needs intimately and who work closely to forge successful relationships. But I don't think you know that, because I don't think it's any longer true. In large measure, it probably once was true. Over deep time, librarians have collected and represented the human record, working primarily in the marketplace, buying books and journals from all sorts of publishers, large and small, corporate and academic. But there are developments out there in society, in the way we teach, in technology, in what we choose to buy, and where we choose to sell, that may be eroding an old partnership. I sense that we are slowly drifting apart, each responding to new stimuli and new opportunities. Elsevier, a multi-billion-dollar corporation, is roughly the same size as the University of Texas system. Big and robust and successful, each will likely be around for a long, long time. But all is not well in the publishing world. We see and feel stresses everywhere as newspapers and small presses, including university presses, fall victim to Darwinian forces wrought by a myriad of factors. We, on the library side, feel our own pressures too. Publicly funded libraries work hard on sharpening their messages to those in resource allocation authority, city managers and legislators, to sustain their support in the face of rising social mandates in every civil sector. Between us, publishers on the one hand and librarians on the other, there are challenges that sometimes spark acerbic responses from each. Libraries respond to the relentless rise in market prices of their books and journals, watching their relative share of the total marketplace of ideas diminish with each passing year, and look yearningly at the open access movement, for example, to stem the rise in prices. Publishers look to librarians and wonder, why can't they up their game? You librarians can afford to buy more, some publishers will say. We cannot change our business model to accommodate your inability to influence local resource allocation decisions. The large corporate and societal publishers may assume that those financial problems in libraries are born of funding cycles and will eventually restore themselves over time. I hope they're right about the funding cycles, but I think they may be mistaken, for I don't think it's just about the money, but rather about how we spend it. My fundamental thesis is this. As librarians, we, perhaps for the first time, are beginning to question the value of our investment in the publishing sector. Or put another way, we librarians are not upping our game because our community is now less interested in the game as it is now played. You see, the sector of the knowledge universe with which teaching and research takes place in the research university is every day less focused on commercial publishing. Rather, we deal in singularities and unique resources that exist in the swirls of the information galaxy, far beyond the reach of all publishers, whose business model is based on the sale of multiple units of a product, whether it's multiple units of a newspaper for $1 or a journal issue for several thousand. In conclusion, I'd like to say that we as librarians have perhaps ingested more than we need. At the University of Texas, I can document 8.5 million known instances of use last year of materials that we have identified and purchased or licensed. From the rest of the world, we borrow 50,000 items annually, less than 0.5% of all of that documented use. I share that data to suggest we, at least at Texas, may be investing a larger share of our resources in traditional scholarly communications than perhaps we should. What would be the cost benefit, say, of meeting 95% or 90% of documented demand from within rather than 99.95? For the research university, I wonder if there's not a greater need, and that is the need to identify, ingest, classify, and make accessible and preserve the trillions of information artifacts in which the publishing sector has no economic interest. I confess that while I remain passionately devoted to the book and remain an advocate of a viable and successful publishing community, my wish is to buy less of what is owned in needless redundancy by my peers and my university, and to invest more in expanding the reach of the research community into the outer regions of the information galaxy that is both beyond the reach and beyond the interest of the publishing community. My challenge is now, and will remain, how to allocate available resources across the vast expanse of possibilities that define the mission of the University of Texas.
Afternoon. Leila suggested that I begin by talking just a little bit about what I've experienced and observed in my first 8 months as the executive director for AAUP. I embarked shortly after I started on what we're referring to internally as a listening tour, which is, I imagine, a phrase that's familiar to those of you who are ARL members. I snarfed it from Elliot Shore. By the way, if you are an ARL member, congratulations. Elliot is inspirational. I really only hope that I can provide the kind of leadership and indefatigable new energy to AAUP that he brings to your organization. He's phenomenal. In any event, I stole his phrase, and I've been out visiting AAUP member presses, and so far I've been to 28 campuses. I think that there's a couple of important things to note from those visits. First and foremost is the heterogeneity of the university press community. It never ceases to amaze me that in a group of 133 people, or 33 entities, 2/3 of whom all have the same 2 words in their name, that very little looks alike once you get past that. The uniqueness can vary by publishing mix, who's doing journals, who's doing monographs, print versus electronic, whether there's regional in the mix, or impact academic trade if you'd rather. If perhaps you're doing some textbook publishing, that's a big influence on who you are and how you behave. Your organizational alignment within your university is critical. Are you part of the library system? Are you a system press, or are you part of an individual campus? Do you report to a provost or a dean, or occasionally an academic department? Finally, what's the overall politics and financial landscape in your university? And the point of all this is that it amazes me to say that with only 133 data points, I really have to be careful about my generalizations, because the truth is, no matter what I say today, tomorrow, 20 years from now, there's always going to be some AAUP member in the back of the room who can raise their hand and say, well, it's actually not that way at my press. So with that caveat, one thing actually has become clear in the course of these visits, and that's that the twin challenges of technology disruption and the corporatization of the academy are placing unprecedented pressures on university presses, frankly, existential pressure in the case of some small and mid-sized presses. And 4 particular themes emerged from the conversations that I had with press directors and press staff about what AAUP might do to help its members respond to these twin challenges. All of them are interesting, but some are only obliquely related to our purpose here today, so I may gloss over a couple of them. Those four themes are: 1, advocacy; 2, scale; 3, community and education; and 4, data. I'll start and touch just briefly on advocacy, because by advocacy, what our members are hoping that we can do more for them is to help establish the value of the university press and its contribution within the university ecosystem. Publishers traditionally promote titles and authors, not themselves. So we actually don't know, in many cases, how to promote ourselves as a proposition, as a valuable component of the university. Plus, frankly, many of us are simply an asterisk on our administrators' agendas, and it's really difficult to get mind share when you're such a small piece of a bigger picture. So that's one contribution to the challenges we face. Second, I mentioned scale. Commercial publishers are emerging in part to achieve scale. We have Random Penguin as the latest example of that. Unfortunately or fortunately, MIT Press can't acquire Harvard. So how do university presses achieve scale? Are there things perhaps that we can do consortially that might achieve similar results? And a good example of where this has already occurred is in the case of, in the technology platform area with things like Project Muse and University Press Scholarship Online. But there are other areas and other functions within a press that we might explore, and those would include production, sales and marketing, back office operations, rights, and the list could go on, where I'm open to, as I have these conversations, I'm open to what develops. The third area of concern touched on community and education, and that's kind of internal to the association, so it's a little bit out of scope for here, so I'll blow past that. Finally, the fourth area of need centered on data, and frankly, there's no shortage of things that we just don't know about ourselves as a community. We don't know how to quantify the value of a university press to a campus, a community, or a region. We don't have reliable data on the dramatic shift in library purchasing patterns. As Ellen mentioned, we don't have current, aggregate, granular data on the cost of publishing a monograph. So those are the four sorts of themes and the four sorts of challenges that we think we face as a community in the months and years ahead. I'll close on just a little bit of a random note, but an important one. If I had to answer the very specific question, what's the one thing I'd like libraries to know? It has to do with permissions. Now, I understand that permissions are a fabulous problem, both from the compliance and administration perspective. All of our members pay permission fees, so we know the pain. And we're actually trying to figure out ways to ease the burden. Unfortunately, that's all my antitrust counsel will let me say about that for right now, but we are working on it. I really do want you to know, though, just how important a revenue source they are for university presses. Because permissions come in at the bottom line of a P&L, they actually have a multiplier effect. So $1 in permissions revenue is the same thing as $5 to $7 in sales on the top line. So they're hugely important to many university presses. At virtually every member press, mission-critical programs and headcount would have to be eliminated without permissions income. So that's the one thing I'd like to leave you all with. Thanks.
So as a collection manager, I make practical decisions about the low-use scholarly monograph that is so important to the humanities and central to the work of the university presses. And some of the things that I think would surprise the presses is that I believe we're in the same ecosystem when it comes to scholarly communication. And when I do my work, I try to keep in mind that we revert back to the mission of the university and have to think very carefully about the role of the library in the creation of new knowledge and that supportive learning. And when it comes to the low-use scholarly monograph, I don't necessarily associate value with use. And it could be that I come from a foreign acquisitions background and I'm quite used to 6 copies of a particular book being available nationwide, and And I've had many years of a routine of collaborating with other research libraries to ensure the breadth of collections. But when it comes to that low-use scholarly monograph, I think it's very important to partner with the university presses in understanding what sustainability means. And it's odd because we know so little about each other. The presses have no idea what we buy and don't know about our metadata panes and how that ties in with discovery. And we have no idea how they figure out their business model or how they come up with the price of the book. And yet, we have to come together and figure out sustainability. So I'm so glad we're having this meeting, and I really believe that the dialogue is long overdue. And what I think is probably surprising to the university presses is that I care quite passionately about that sustainability.
All right, well, we'll just dive right in here. We're really going to make this sort of a panel discussion. So I wanted to just start maybe with one of the issues, at least we possibly have the fewest answers to, the issue of open access and content pricing. I wanted to open this part of the discussion with a little bit fuller version of Stuart Brand's infamous quote to start us off. Quote, on one hand, information wants to be expensive because it's so valuable. The right information in the right place just changes your life. On the other hand, information wants to be free because the cost of getting it out is lower and lower all the time. So you have these two fighting against each other. I think we are all very familiar with one part of that phrase, but maybe not the other. And I think that kind of gets at the heart of what we struggle with as libraries and publishers. So considering this constant tug of war between the two extremes of expensive and free, how do we reconcile those two things? And is some content more valuable than others?
Yeah, I actually think that the answer lies in not reconciling the two things. I think in order to get to where most of the folks in the room want to be, the two have to remain in tension, and it's actually the tension that will produce the answer that we're all looking for. The challenge right now is you've got one group of folks who want to pretend that nothing needs to change, and you've got another group of folks who want to pretend that what they want doesn't cost anything. And so the most extreme voices on both sides of this debate get strident, they get all the attention, they generate more heat than light, and the rest of us are sort of stuck in the middle here without an answer to the question. And I think, just to round that out, the answer to the question lies in respecting the tension between both parts of what Brand is saying.
Anyone else want to jump into that one? Or we can move on. In light of this, what do we do with the scholarly monograph? I've heard a number of people at this meeting talk about use determining value, and then others who are very opposed to that concept. It seems that most of the tension does seem to be focused on the scholarly monograph. What do we as library or as our publishers do about that?
In New York, we established a consortium called the Manhattan Research Libraries Initiative, and it fosters collaboration between Columbia University Libraries, the New York Public Library, Research Libraries, and NYU. And one of the big issues we work on together is how to explore the approach to the low-use scholarly monograph together. And we have a pilot project in place with Oxford University Press for coverage of the UPSO collection of university press books, and I think that's helped us understand new approaches and has been very valuable.
I think one of the singular things that defines us as a nation would be our universities. And those universities are in turn defined by the faculties that drive teaching, learning, and research in those places. And albeit we are truly a very conservative institution, universities, the notion of how a faculty is credentialed and promoted defines us. And the scholarly monograph is at the center of what we do, and I think will always remain a key part of every major university as it builds its faculties. You know, we talk a little bit about cost of university presses. You know, there are 2 points I think we can make. When you think about subventions, obviously the subvention of University Press at Texas is a fraction of what it costs to subvene the university libraries. So let's put it in that context. And in true particular case, the University of Texas, the total subvention is less than the salary of the outside linebackers coach on the football team.
So university presses, most of them still get most of their money by the sale of books and journals. And that means that our money comes in by the unit, by selling a certain number of units of something. And I think that structure made good sense before the internet in a world where distribution meant the distribution of a unit of a work. It was sensible to have our financial support tied appropriately to the objective of disseminating work. And now the concept of units has just gone out the window, and it seems to me that monographs are sort of the key example to that. The thing that's been steady throughout everything else changing is the tenure requirement to write a book. But in accompanying that has been the specialization of the academy, and that's a big factor that's affecting both libraries and presses, is that scholars are working in more and more narrow fields. And, you know, we used to be trying to get the work of an author to 1,500 people. Now we're trying to get it to 137 people. So I'm just seconding the idea that the tenure requirement is an oddly static factor in a swirling cauldron of change around it.
While we're sort of talking about the money end of things, is this the time to make a philosophical and a financial shift to the concept of paying for access and usability rather than simply paying for content? Is there anything to that?
I've worked hard on cutting back on duplication between research libraries in the New York area and maintaining the revenue level jointly with research libraries in the New York area to commit to a broader range of scholarly monographs. So we've tried to hold the spend and keep it the same rather than cut back on the spend. And when it comes to access only, there's a level of discomfort in terms of collection stewardship because I care about understanding the terms of use associated with the content in dialogue with the publishers. And I want a perpetual access clause that's meaningful. And if we're freeing up the content, maybe jointly we can think through DRM. So access only, moving through an aggregator without a dialogue with the publishers misses out on some of that, and I find it's important.
I think that we're now permanently in a world of multiple business models, and some stuff is going to be owned and some stuff is going to be accessed, and that will be the way it is. I think that we're particularly thinking about this with textbooks because of students really letting go of any kind of desire to own their own library of books, which seems to have to do with iTunes and Netflix and other sort of concepts where they don't need to feel like after they use or read the content, it remains with them. And that's a big cultural shift for us to deal with.
It's not just books, though. Zip cars and city bikes, right? These are generational different things.
During a previous discussion among the panelists, Angela had asked the very good question, what is a collecting strategy that sustains the low usage model during a time when many libraries believe that access to the collection is enough? I mean, you've touched on that a little bit, and the flip side of the question is how do university presses deal with that? What is or is there a publishing model that sustains low usage material? Of course, I guess if we knew that, then, really there would be no need for this discussion. The silence may mean we really have no answer to that.
Well, doesn't part of the answer have to be for low usage content a shift from pay to read to a shift to pay to publish? If there's a third option, I have not heard anybody suggest it.
So I would also add that collecting, when done right, is defined by who we are in each of our respective universities with each of the disciplines and spires of excellence that we support. And in those areas, it's right that there should be things of very low use. There are reasons they are there. In areas that are not in our areas of expertise, then access makes more sense. So I think that dichotomy, I can't imagine not doing some of the things we do in Latin America, even though the particular use of a single item could be very, very low.
During our earlier discussion, after Angela had talked about, what is this low usage model, Fred gave a very interesting response. He said, scholars have an information need, not a monograph need. And I think that, to me, that really got to the heart of a lot of what we're struggling with as publishers. So how do we respond to this statement? And, if monographs are indeed the problem, what should university presses be publishing?
I think that one takes us back to the question of first books and tenure requirements. If the contribution that an individual scholar makes today has changed, and could be measured by their contribution to a collaborative project or the programming that they figured out around a digital something, and not by a book-length argument that had to be at least 236 pages long, then we could talk about publishing those original contributions or highlighting them or whatever the appropriate thing is for the digital stuff, and not having to do it in that long form object. And that would open everything up. But as far as I can tell, that's not about to change.
Yeah, I wonder if and maybe I'm just saying the same thing in a different way. I wonder, though, if the real catalyst here isn't the technology disruption. And, we think about and consume short form and long form scholarship in increasingly different ways. And so maybe symptoms of things like the tenure discussion and the low use collection discussion and even the what should university presses discussion are all just kind of more symptoms of the root cause. And then the root cause is actually the technology is changing the way we think about what's long form and what's short form scholarship.
Let's talk for a couple minutes before we open it up to questions from the audience about data. I really liked Angela's comment a couple minutes ago. University presses don't know how we buy and what our metadata pain points are. And to me, this has been one of the most vexing issues surrounding this technology disruption. I feel like at the very moment where publishers, and particularly university presses, need to know more about the end user or our individual customer, we're increasingly reliant on third-party vendors or mediators to reach our end users, and so there's this growing disconnect between us. So, I've asked everybody here, how do we get closer to our users? Well, I know. But in terms of the nuts and bolts, I guess that's because. We only have to have information to guess, basically, about, what is it exactly that you want, what formats, metadata pain points. Do we need to be in closer contact with the vendors? Do we need to be going around, making site visits at libraries very regularly?
Yeah, I think this is the fundamental question I've heard here at this conference. For the first time, probably ever, we can contemplate the data, the middleware that interprets the data, and the narrative product that summarizes the data traveling across the millennia together in time. We don't know how to deal with that yet, but for the first time we can ask that question, and I think that's our responsibility going forward to do that.
Okay. I mentioned the pilot project we have going on in New York with UPSO, and we have plans to do assessment work looking at data points, and I think if you start to do that project by project and share the data with the presses, we both learn. But it feels like a starting point for us. It's not the sort of assessment work we've done in the past with a concentration on the university presses.
I think maybe, too, one of the challenges is that we are each only part of the other's kind of environment, if you will, right? Libraries account for probably something around 25%. Academic research libraries account for something around 25% of university press revenues, and I don't even know what the number is, but I know that we're a very small percentage, maybe 3 or 4% of research library budgets are spent on university press titles. So you've got the reality of that on the one hand, but on the other hand, I think we both have a disproportionate understanding of how important we each are to the scholarly communication ecosystem, and therefore a disproportionate interest in trying to make things better.
Fred had pulled together some data because we were talking about the common wisdom, that about 20 to 25% of university press revenue comes from academic libraries, and Fred and Angela pulled together some interesting data Texas spent between 20 and 21% of its book budget on university press content. NYU spent about 39% of its print book budget for its U.S. libraries on university press content, and about 9.2% of its budgeted funds on university press electronic content. So to me, those were in some ways higher numbers, particularly for NYU, than what I had expected. Approval. See, there's the asterisk. That's why it's so difficult to figure these things out. And I'll just throw out one other quick data point that will lead to a question about short-term loan. One of the things that we've seen, obviously, is a transition from approval plan purchasing to PDA, DDA, and short-term loans. And I got a set of data for our own press from our vendor YBP recently. And, unsurprisingly, it's showing print book erosion. That was not a surprise. But what was a surprise was not the fact that there was great uptake in DDA programs and STL, but what the revenue for that was. And if you look at, in our case, print erosion of about $20,000 worth of sales, but was only offset by growth in combined DDA and short-term loan of $5,000. So you're looking at about a quarter of new revenue to replace, this full $20,000 that's going away. Maybe could the librarians talk a little bit about short-term loan and how that's sort of figuring into what you're doing? And is that not the problem, or should university presses be handling this differently?
Yeah, it's on. So NYU has not done demand-driven acquisitions with the short-term loan approach. So I don't have direct experience with that, but maybe someone in the audience would want to comment.
I'm going to go ahead and I'll bring the other mic out so we can go. Seems like a good time to open up the audience question. Questions from the audience? STL or anything else? Surely you've got all these great people up here. What can they demystify for you?
All the way back.
Oh.
I'm not entirely sure. Oh, sorry. A little too loud. Hopefully everybody can hear me now. I'm not entirely sure how to phrase this question, but it goes back to this issue of short-term and long-term, long-form scholarship. And this idea of the scholarly monograph as being sort of the, required, especially in certain disciplines, the humanities, sort of this required rite of passage, and feeding the university presses and being something we all value and yet getting little use. And we're seeing, at the University of Virginia where I work, we've seen a steep decline, even among faculty and graduate students, even within the humanities, even within different disciplines, of the circulation of our books, even as our e-content, particularly e-journals, are rising. And so it's interesting to me that this remains a standard, and yet perhaps even the audience for some of these materials may be becoming, following sort of the trends we've all seen in people lamenting the demise of reading in general and the demise of people taking that time to really spend time with a book. I'm wondering if even the scholarly audience is becoming more interested in pursuing more short-term scholarship rather than taking the time to pursue those monographs themselves. People who might be the natural audience for them. I don't know if there's any evidence for that, but it's just something that occurred to me when you're talking about this, and that there might be other means which we've all thought about over time of this being the first, or faculty being bound to this particular model. Is this a model that is perhaps even of less interest to its natural audience? Does that make sense?
I think I'm with you. One of the consequences of digital technology is that we used to be able to ignore the very sticky question of whether anyone actually read a scholarly monograph from page 1 to the end, or did they just dip into it. Now we know a lot more about the difference between research behavior and reading. And those are getting exposed and pulled apart all the time now. It's a great fear I have about this environment is that a usage-based environment is that you put this dipping into things together with the popularity of peer referrals. People want to read what somebody in their field who they respect recommends. Pretty soon you're into this self-fulfilling prophecy where the most popular things are what get read, and this is an issue for librarians and publishers both, the whole idea of providing things that people didn't know they wanted goes away. So I didn't quite answer the question, but I think the answer, at least from the books that we're selling, is that everyone, including scholars, is preferring short reading material.
Your question reminded me, I think it was in 2009, I heard a presentation by Highwire that was talking about a study they had done comparing users of STM material and humanities material in electronic form, and I think the assumption going into the study was that the patterns of reading were very different. Humanities people were much more interested in this long form. And I vividly remember hearing this panel because the answer was no, they're really not very different at all. And I sort of had a mild panic attack. The other phrase I remember from that is, you shouldn't call yourself book publishers, you should be content publishers. So I think, and now whether you agree with that, that's sort of a separate discussion. But when talking about data, one of the things that we can sometimes get from our vendors, especially with short-term loan and those kind of lens, I've seen you can actually look how many pages of a book is someone accessing for how long. So should that data inform acquisitions questions? At a panel between libraries and publishers a few years ago, we were talking about some of this, and a librarian said, well, but would that change the kinds of things that scholarly publishers published? And, well, yes is maybe the answer, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But right, I think we can't ignore that data now.
And I just wanted to add that my purpose wasn't necessarily to defend that continued monographic model or say that but it does seem that perhaps there could be a loss if there's just this shift to the short term, or perhaps there may not be. I mean, if that's what scholars are using, but it is an interesting shift, I think, in the way that these things are put together and edited, refined over time, sort of the purpose behind them, just in terms of the general sort of conversation about reading in general that's taking place.
I think that this is going to see a lot of traction, and we're going to be surprised at how quickly it starts, but it is going to hit a wall, because at the end of the day, it's the scholarly argument that's going to determine the length of the content, right? And if the scholarship doesn't fit into a short form, it doesn't fit into a short form.
I was wondering what the possibility is for print on demand, especially for some of the low use or first book authors with first books, and especially I think what was talked about yesterday in one of the meetings, thinking of universities perhaps subsidizing some of the first books. Is there room for print on demand and sustainability?
I think most of the presses are already incorporating print on demand throughout their program, and I don't think of it as a sort of separate solution of some kind. I think of it as part of the spectrum of tools available to us to manufacture print things, and we use it at the end of the life of some very successful backlist title. We use it for the second printing of a low volume, low selling title. Sometimes it could be the only print strategy for a very, an E primary title. Most of the authors I know want print copies for their mother, for their tenure committee, for their bookshelf, for their friends. And that's enough these days for us to make a short-run digital print run and then move it into to POD later. So the answer is yes, but it's not like it doesn't solve any particular large problem for us. It's just a nice, very low volume tool in our kit.
I just wanted to make a comment on Ellen's note about the peer referral being perhaps a kind of a very closed circle. And to me, it speaks to the kind of metadata referrals that are similar to, like, you liked this thing, you might like this thing. And a kind of a call to arms that I'd like to make to the library community and the publishing community to work together on very rich metadata and structured taxonomies that really help make those systems work well.
Just to second that, since you seconded mine. I think that as publishers, we're jumping into some of the same techniques on our own websites about the top 10 most read articles or the top 10, books selected this week or something that are volume measures. And we have to be really careful that we're not, part of this problem. The 10 articles with the greatest impact might be possibly of interest to people, but that's might be different than the top 10 best read ones.
Yeah, October Ivins. I was a librarian before I was a consultant, and I apologize if you all have heard this comment from me before. I think a lot of the problem with book use is that we don't have comparable finding aids. So this comment over here about richer metadata really resonates with me. Articles sort of carry their own metadata. They're in a journal, which is in a database, and they're abstracting and indexing services, and they're full text searchable, and you can find them more easily. Books don't have that chance. The book reviews come out so much later than the book is published. So there's a delay there. I really try to encourage my clients to create their own MARC records for books with chapter level metadata and with using more of the subject heading fields and allowing some full text searching, making sure it's exposed to Google. So people may land on a book and not know why they got there if it's being searched and then that search doesn't display. But I think there's so much we can do to help books get more attention.
I'll share one anecdotal comment on this. As we were preparing statistics for this meeting, so in those 8.5 million documented uses of things at our university, $2 million of them are books. And that translates roughly, 2 to 6, which is also roughly the ratio of our investment in journals and things electronic and books. So to me, the takeaway that I had was the book is holding its own at the University of Texas.
October, I think a lot of the discoverability things that you're talking about are happening. Presses signing up through Muse or Oxford, sending out their own metadata feeds. Again, I'm not sure that's the entire fix for the low usage. I mean, it's something we have to do, and certainly I'm not sure every publisher has kind of incorporated aspects of that new workflow, especially when you're talking about breaking things apart in terms of chapter level. But I think my sense is at least we all know that's part of what we need to do, that discoverability is sort of our last hope in some ways.
We're asking book authors to submit chapter level abstracts and keywords when they turn in their manuscript now. They don't care for it, but we're asking them to do it. Why isn't this exactly where libraries and publishers could help each other, this whole area of metadata? I think it's a valid question to ask, who should be doing the metadata for the University Press books. Could that not be some kind of at least joint project with the libraries?
I have heard it. I can't remember any press names, but I have heard anecdotal evidence that there are a few libraries who work very closely with their press on that, but I don't think it's many. So that I know presses, at least small and medium sized, would probably be thrilled for that sort of help. Right. Or as Peter suggests, teach scholars how to do this. I can second with Ellen because we've just started requesting this sort of chapter level keyword and abstract, and many are not happy about it, both inside the press and outside the press, but we realize that's something that has to happen. So, any other questions? Oh, we've got one in the back.
Maybe having two senior moments here. I may be having a senior moment here, but I don't remember referencing a statistic that said what percentage of...
You said, you referred to something on how much of the budget is spent on university presses. You said the university spends, I forget the amount percent, but you said a percent.
I think I was it was a guesstimate, and I was referring to the percentage of the library budget spend on university
I wasn't
press
sure.
books.
That's what I wanted to verify, if it was library or university budget.
That's not
if it was
a number.
University, I would have had an argument with you.
No, sorry.
No, that's all right. You said university. I just wanted to make clear that. Thank you.
I meant the library, and it's a number that I was trying to pull out of my deep memory. So it's not anything that I would commit to, but it's a very low percentage anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we all know that the money's going to Elsevier and the good folks that just bought us ice cream and cookies.
Anything else? All right, well, we're right at time. Thank you all. Thanks to our presenters.